Hello. Hey, Darragh. How's it going?
Hello, good afternoon, Griffin.
Good afternoon. We were just chatting before, so it feels funny to say that again. But hello to everyone on the call joining us for Behind the Future. Um, Before we jump into it, let's do some super quick intros so that people know who we're talking to. Um, we're also really eager to hear from you guys on the call, so please feel free to chime in with questions, and we'll have some time at the end where we can get to them. But my name is Griffin Schumacher. I'm a lead account executive at Ardoq, an enterprise architecture software company. I've had the privilege of working with probably hundreds of architecture teams at this point, revamping their practices, aligning on the business outcomes that they're looking to solve, and helping them get a seat at the table in more strategic IT conversations. So I'll be your host for today, and I'm joined today by Darragh. Darragh, do you want to give a quick introduction as well?
Sure, yeah, I'm Darragh O'Grady. I lead the enterprise architecture practice out of New York City in Protiviti. And I've been involved in enterprise architecture for many years, mostly in financial services, because that is where really our focus area in New York has been. So I've dealt with many complex challenges for CIOs in large institutions who really are dealing with the complexity that enterprise architecture aims to help solve.
Great. Thanks for that. We're super excited to have you on. You have a ton of really relevant experience in this industry in AI and in enterprise architecture as well. We have a really cool talk planned for today. Behind the Future is Ardoq's LinkedIn Live series. This is actually the 19th iteration. We'll typically host technology professionals and we talk about the future of business and IT. The name Behind the Future is asking what is going to be the mechanism that brings about the future of technology and also how technology will enable business. We've had a variety of topics across the 19 versions of this show. I think now, though, there's a very interesting and obvious one, which is AI. So AI is rapidly changing how we work. It's rapidly changing how enterprise architects work. I think most of us, I know me and you, Dar, are using ChatGPT or some other, AI tool daily. Probably many people tuned into this call are using something like that. And if you're not, it's probably time to get on it because your coworkers and your competitors definitely are. But what we want to talk about today is how AI and enterprise architecture are going to interact. Can AI make architects better? Will AI actually help enterprise architects live up to the demands that are placed on them? Or is AI going to consume enterprise architecture and leave architects obsolete, like the switchboard operators of olden times or some other job made obsolete by technology? So we want to talk about it a little bit. I think we have a perspective, but we're also curious to hear what people tuned in have to say. So, Darragh, I'll open it up and just ask you, based off of your experience in EA and how you're using AI now, how do you think AI is actually going to help enterprise architects deliver more value?
So it's a really good question. I think it's worth breaking into two real concerns. One is around the goals of enterprise architects, which is around managing the enterprise architecture of an organization, and then what enterprise architects themselves do to facilitate that. And from my perspective, the biggest role that enterprise architects have is around managing complexity and helping CIOs and business leaders make sure that things don't get so out of control complexity wise that it's impossible to do things, to respond to events, to actually be agile and to achieve business goals and objectives. And while enterprise architects can't solve all those challenges, they definitely have a key role in ensuring that the complexity growth of an organization, because growth is constant, right? The technology landscapes keep on getting more complex, and there's simply no way that humans can manage that growth and complexity. There's just way too much dimensions to be managed, right? So the bottom line is that AI can help enterprise architects because it gives them like superpowers to help make sense of the vast amount of information that's really available. So I think that's a good thing, and I think ultimately AI should help organizations manage their complexity more effectively as a result, right?
Mhm.
So yeah, so that's my going in point, if you like.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. So it sounds like you're saying an architect's core job is to manage the complexity, and AI can, in a sense, give architects superpowers because they'll have an easier time making sense of the data, giving precise insights to their stakeholders, so on and so forth.
Exactly, and I think the expectations for enterprise architects has always been, I think, higher than what most enterprise architects are capable of delivering, right? And it's not necessarily because of individual ability, but just really the scope of the different dimensions that they really need to be looking at. So obviously there's the core, so shall I say, TOGAF dimensions of business architecture, application architecture, data architecture, and technology architecture. Any one of those is quite complex, right? A lot of different moving parts. Enterprise architects need to string these different things together into a compelling narrative, and that's hard to do. And you've got to take in consideration what a business area is trying to achieve, what the enterprise is trying to achieve, what the strategy of the organization is, and that's really it's very hard to meet expectations around that. Plus, you're dealing with multiple stakeholders, right?
Yeah.
And different stakeholders have different needs and concerns that they want to have highlighted or brought to their attention. And I think it's probably a fact that when we look at a lot of enterprise architects today, they spend more of their time doing diagrams, right? They're trying to communicate, but the way that architects communicate is usually through diagrams, right?
Yeah.
And that's time consuming. It involves obviously working closely with a small stakeholder group to create a visualization that makes sense to that stakeholder group, but then you're leaving out other stakeholders while you're doing that.
Right.
And so architects are forced to figure out, well, which of the stakeholders I actually care about.
Right.
And usually the stakeholders that they care about are the ones who are paying their bill, which is usually the CIO.
Right.
So
yeah, the
these are
economic
very technology focused, diagrams.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And I think something that we see sometimes with architecture teams is something we call death by repository, where they spend so much time trying to get all of the right data before they're willing to make any sort of recommendation or suggestion, that they never get to that critical tipping point where they're able to actually provide value. And at least as I think about AI within EA, that's an area that I see it potentially helping out, is augmenting the data cleansing process, the data retrieval process, and making it easier for architects to make recommendations to their stakeholders.
I think that's a very key point, because information and data is the lifeblood of enterprise architects' ability to function, right? They need to know what information is needed in order to help facilitate decision making. And getting that information and making it fit for consumption is a lot of work. And the reality is that enterprise architecture teams are not equipped to carry out that kind of data management, if you like. And most enterprise architects, they don't want to spend their time, cleaning data, enterprise data that's maybe useful, but will just take a fair bit of work just to get it to the point that it could be useful. So there's definitely some core capabilities there. But looking at enterprise architects as a consumer of this data, right? And ultimately enterprise architects are consumers of enterprise data. Then you want that data to be at your fingertips. You want it to be easy navigable and discoverable. And there's a huge opportunity there for AI to help with that. So AI can help with obviously the process of helping identify what data is where, right? Because there's tools out there already which will understand what data is across your organization and understand the semantics of that data. And you can use AI to sort of say, I need information which covers X, Y, and Z, and it will go and say, hey, this data here and this data here can help you with that. And then it'll also even go one step further and actually pull the data in and perform an analysis on it as well.
Yeah.
But you need to know what questions to ask, obviously, and that definitely is an art that enterprise architects develop, knowing what questions to ask.
Yeah.
But being able to have the data, I think, is absolutely key. And really, enterprise architecture teams need an enabling capability in the organization, which ensures that the data that they're getting is actually fit for purpose.
Yeah, totally. It sounds like you're saying that AI can help with with gathering the right data, maybe pointing out the right data. I think something else that we're seeing some of the EA providers do now in the tooling is actually inferring connections across data sets. So I know, for example, in Ardoq's platform, we can use AI to generate like an application description. We can also use AI to generate linkages between a capability model and the applications that are fulfilling or realizing a given capability. So I think there's also this headroom where we can remove some of the manual work that architects are doing currently, and enable them to have more strategic conversations. I think you said in one of our previous chats, no one signed up to be an architect to be a data cleanser, right? And so the more AI can help strip that stuff away and actually let architects have strategic conversations or give really, really good advice or insight into the IT portfolio, I think the better.
And I think it's important to understand that data falls into two camps, really. One is the sort of the absolute data, which reflects actual truth, if you like. This might be which applications using which servers, for example. This information that's known and is operationally critical, right? And then the more sort of strategic architecture information, which is like mapping things to reference architectures and process models, which are a little more fuzzy because they're kind of like, they're kind of businessy, right? So it depends on how that information is being used, whether it's useful or not. But I think that type of information is definitely AI can help massively, as you mentioned, figuring out which applications, how they map to reference architectures and mapping them to process models, and based on information that's available. The harder data is the harder data that comes from actual enterprise processes, where you have your application inventory and you have your information from actual, so we say IT for IT processes, right? That you can join with the sort of the business architecture information to give you more insights into how things flow all the way down from the business perspective down to actual operational concerns. And that data obviously is not as good as it could be in most organizations. AI has a role in helping clean that data. But I think where techniques like generative AI to stop it hallucinating and creating things which seem like fact but are actually made up, you do need the knowledge graph concept where the associations between things are made explicit to the generative AI engine. And this is where architects need to curate effectively those relationships and making sure those relationships are actually correct. And that will ensure that the information you get out of your AI is actually factual as opposed to made up.
Right. So yeah, we don't want to set up some scenario where architects are turning everything over to AI. AI is providing some good data, but probably some less good data, some less accurate data as well. And there's no human in the loop to sort of validate that information, especially as it relates to the subjective or the more fuzzy information, i.e. what business concepts are, or business drivers or capabilities or processes are being fulfilled by a specific technology element.
And one thing that I think we're seeing more of as sort of particularly around the role of regulatory compliance, but also around enterprise policies and standards, where effectively there's expectations around how things should be done. That enterprise architects have a responsibility in ensuring that those enterprise needs are being addressed. Right. The problem is that there's a lot of information in terms of like a lot of policies, a lot of requirements, a lot of regulations. That there's way too many for any one person to really understand. But AI can obviously help be kind of like an expert in that space. And again, the enterprise architect can ask the right questions and really help figure out, okay, how do we best address these requirements in a way that actually helps move our technology strategy forward.
Right. So it kind of prevents the architect from having to know everything, and it gives them basically a reference source that enables them to be a bit more, accurate in understanding like which policies need to be addressed when you're building out a specific solution.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that makes sense. So it sounds like when we're thinking about AI helping EA, removing some of the manual work, helping create connections across data sets that maybe don't exist already, being a knowledge source for architects. So They don't have to be, the sort of trusted advisor on everything. They can kind of refer to this when they give advice, or just a few ways that AI will help architects do their job better. I think the flip side of this conversation is how can enterprise architects actually help support AI or drive the adoption of AI? Is that something that you've thought about at all?
It's certainly an interesting topic, and I know that, for example, Protiviti is meeting a lot of demand out there in terms of organizations who are looking for governance around AI. They're trying to, because organizations are concerned because there's all kinds of risks attached to using AI, right? I kind of think that within IT organizations, there's a lot of pressure, obviously, to do stuff with AI, do something, do something.
We're kind of joking now that like stuff gets funding, like you kind of just need to put the AI stamp on it, and so people are like, yeah. So anyway,
right. So I mean, IT organizations at the end of the day, they don't care so much about, if you like, that governance stuff, which is being still developing, evolving. So they need to do something, and IT organizations are moving ahead and they're doing stuff. Particularly, I mean, in an enterprise setting, I think there's a lot of questions about where AI could fit in, and I think that really organizations should take a crawl, walk, run approach to AI the same way that they generally do with enterprise architecture itself, right? Where you need to sort of put some basic. Understand that there's a progression, if you like, and right now everyone's in the crawl stage in the sense that let's just do something, let's figure out, let's understand a bit more about what this can do, and that tends to be a little bit more chaotic, I think. Lots of different pockets everywhere. There's not really, left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing, potentially from an enterprise perspective. The policies and standards around AI are still not yet formed or established, and enterprise architecture's role in enforcing governance is still up in the air, right? There's still no expectation there, and most EA teams are probably not even involved necessarily in those conversations, right? But as organizations sort of move up the walk and run, I think this is where EA becomes critical to helping organizations with their AI adoption, and there's different sort of I guess avenues there, but obviously the most important one is probably around return on investment. Is like, where's the most value in adopting AI, and this is where business architecture concepts can help, in understanding what are your value streams and what are the capabilities, and then which are the ones that you could sort of say, well, actually there's big gaps here, and AI could help close those gaps, right? So it's more your traditional sort of business architecture, but now you've got an extra tool in the box in the sense of closing that gap. AI is a tool that you can use to close the gap.
Right.
So there's a lot of certainly opportunities for consultants and things like that to perform those kinds of assessments for organizations. But right now, I think people are just kind of going the low-hanging fruit, right? The obvious pain points where they can try things out. There is a sort of a broader, when you start getting into technology and say, okay, there's probably going to be committees and groups who are looking at use cases within enterprises. But when you get into the technology and you kind of realize today, there's a lot of large language models out there. And there's a lot of different ways those models can be consumed, whether it's through an API like OpenAI or Microsoft services or wherever else, or on premise where you run the model locally and you have it as internal service. I think the reality is that there's going to be an explosion of large language models within an organization. There's going to be different models for different purposes. It's not like one model for everything. There's going to be different ones. Some might be fine-tuned internally in-house. Some might be just standard that are just updated every now and again. And that's going to give rise to a lot of complexity, right? At some point, somebody somewhere, there's going to be something that happens where a model is suddenly discovered to have a big issue, like it. For example, it doesn't understand the color green or whatever, and it's like, where are we using that? We got to fix all these and replace them all quickly before we get into an embarrassing situation. And then
the EA team could be a source of knowledge for that type of information.
Well, I kind of think is like people will turn to EA and say, hey, where are we using this? And it's like EA will be like, we need to get ahead of that, right? And start with that. But this is one of the challenges. It's very similar to that challenge a few years back when there was a Java library which had a huge vulnerability, and teams had to scan through all their software to see which ones were actually using that so they could fix it. It was a massive exercise for a lot of organizations, right? And again, enterprise architecture is one of its purposes to help make sure that that information is captured and managed so that you can say, yes, we know exactly which applications use this model. We understand the business impact of replacing it, or if it's not updated. Those kind of perspectives are obviously core value propositions that EA can bring.
It sounds like, I mean, there's two really interesting things. One, well, everyone is in this sort of exploration phase where they're throwing AI at everything. I don't think there's a super clear understanding as to where AI will provide the highest ROI for a given organization. And using the business architecture concepts, EA teams can be a part of that conversation and help steer investment towards where AI will have the biggest impact. I think that's a really exciting opportunity for a lot of architecture teams. And then the part two is something that can be done in the near term, which is just tracking which large language models are being used in which applications and in which capabilities. I think there's a kind of unique opportunity where often what happens is there's some sort of business continuity event, and then the architecture team is expected to have the answer. They don't, and then so going forward, they're tracking interdependencies related to whatever caused that problem. But the chances of that same problem happening twice are low. But here with AI, EA teams have the foresight to start cataloging this stuff, because the chance of there being some, with hallucinations, the chance of there being some sort of risk seems high. So if architecture teams can establish themselves as this hub of knowledge around where the models are being used, who's using them, what they're being used for, they can really position themselves to be in a good spot when something does go wrong, which it seems likely that something will at some point.
Well, and this is, I think, just talks to the general value proposition of EA, which I think has always been a struggle for EA to break itself out of its technology focus, is not just focus on the what, but how it's being used, right? The use, how is technology being used to enable business outcomes? And a lot of the time, technology has been used in ways that the actual IT teams don't even know about necessarily, right? Because once a system is deployed and is operable, business can use it for whatever they want, really. I mean, as long as the functionality is there, they can apply it for all kinds of things, and IT may not be involved. So enterprise architects have an interest in understanding how technology is being used as well as how it's being built, right? And I think that applies especially when it comes to large language models. You need to know where it's been used, so you can. And a lot of this is about risk management, right? What are the risks, and how do you manage the risks? And if you don't know where they're being used, and how ultimately gets all the way down to your infrastructure and your technologies.
Yeah. I just a quick side question. Why do you think it is so challenging for a lot of architecture teams to communicate their value?
I mean, a lot of that is around the tools available for architects and the access to data, right? I mean, we just said data is not necessarily there in a good form. The storytelling, which is something we could go into, is a big thing. But this is a lot of the time, IT organizations are not expected to take that role, as in what is the technology being used for, because they're not equipped to do it. They're not staffed or organized to do it. But increasingly, CIOs are recognizing that they have an obligation to have some view as to how technology has been used. And I think once that expectation is understood, and when enterprise architects start talking about technology usage in language that a business can understand, that's when people start paying attention. And this is where the value of reference architectures and things come in, because business don't think about these things, right? They don't need reference architectures. They know what they need to do, right? But to tell a story to show what impacts of technology, you need that kind of language, the whole way through. So I think those are situations improving how EA's perception is, but it's not necessarily there yet.
Yeah. So it sounds like part of it is a data problem, like architects are just struggling to get the data they need, and then part of it is a communication challenge or a perception from the business challenge. Anyway, I have one last topic I want to ask about with you, and the question is, if AI becomes what everyone wants it to be or is imagining it to be, and it truly can remove all sorts of manual work from an architect's job, and it can become this sort of central hub of information for people to use across an enterprise. how will architects stay relevant? Why will companies even need enterprise architecture teams? What's going to be the future of the architecture role in a world with AI?
And that's, I think, from the point of pure information, in principle, anybody who's trying to solve a problem or deliver something in technology or achieve an outcome should be able to tap into the capabilities that an EA AI can offer, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, not everyone's going to know what questions to ask. Not everyone's necessarily going to care about the responses. So the EAs have a formal role in the enterprise. They should be there because they're there because the strategy of the enterprise requires them to be there to help make sure that certain goals are achieved enterprise-wide. So you need the human in the loop. It's just that the extent to which that human needs to be doing all of the work necessary to get to the point of a decision versus making the decision itself, right? And I think this is where enterprise architects, and enterprise architects often don't make those decisions either. They make recommendations to
Right.
executives who are accountable for making decisions, who could ignore that. But this is where I think the storytelling part is really important. Most executives who are looking at the best interests of their organization and balancing their own kind of specific needs, will ultimately make what they think is best for the organization, given sufficient information and insights. So I think that the EAs, you could certainly say that if we provide the data, those executives could say, I don't want to talk to an AI, I just want to ask the AI, right? And that would certainly be the case, but can they trust the data? Can they trust what's behind that decision-making process? I think enterprise architects are still critical to that, and ultimately, you do want a throat to choke, right? I mean,
right. And AI will never be able to be a throat to choke.
Exactly.
There, you touched on the storytelling bit, and I want to loop back to that. I think in my experience working with architecture teams, the most effective architects are truly compelling storytellers. They know the right data. They might not have all of the best data, but they know the data they need. They know how to sculpt it into a narrative. And they know how to be essentially salespeople at the end of the day so that their recommendations get implemented. I mean, we've all met plenty of architecture teams who probably make great recommendations, but the recommendations don't get implemented because they haven't been able to convey their information in a compelling way. And AI can help with that, right? Like it can help with the data, and AI to an extent can actually help sculpt a story, but there still needs to be that human delivering the message, in my opinion, to truly make change happen.
I think a lot of this depends on the type of decision, right? I think the concepts of type 1 versus type 2 decisions, which a lot of folks in this call are probably familiar with. Type 1 being those big strategic decisions that are hard to reverse, very expensive, for example, like creating a new data center or deciding to move to Azure or AWS, whatever. Those can be quite difficult decisions, to make. And those are definitely ones where you want a human in the loop, and there's different factors that probably need to be taken into account that an AI may not be aware of. But these type 2 decisions, which are less critical and maybe easily roll back or reversible, go ahead. AI can probably help you make those decisions, and have relatively low risk.
Right. And so I think that framing is really interesting. So perhaps if AI can take over the type 2 or the reversible decisions, it will push architects into being more focused on the type 1 decisions. You're never going to have a C-suite person asking an AI, should we go to AWS or GCP? Right. Like that's just never something that they will trust. I mean, maybe I'm wrong, but at least in the near term, that's never something they'll trust to a ChatGPT type interface.
Well, just
but
like
I think right.
What are the inputs? If you're asking a human, you want to know what inputs they use for their decision. You do the same with AI, and that needs to be trusted. The inputs need to be trusted.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that's part of it. I think it's being able to understand where the recommendation is coming from, what's the data, what's the rationale. And is that not something that you can, if I type into ChatGPT and ask for a recommendation, can I ask it for why it's giving me that recommendation or
It can, but you
backend
don't.
data?
But do you trust it? Do you, as a person, trust that source? Right.
I see. Yeah, that makes sense. And so that's why architects need to be these trusted advisors, which is, a reputational effect that's kind of built up over time.
Are we at time?
Oh, I guess so. Let's so I haven't even looked at the chat. Let's move on to Q&A. Oh, looks like we've had some questions, comments in here. Let me take a look through. Oh, I see we have some right here. What can enterprise architects do to get up to speed with adoption of AI in their ways of working? Do you want to answer that, and then I can add my thoughts after you?
It's an interesting question, particularly where a lot of large organizations probably have lots of barriers for people to access some of these tools until they decide to roll it out as a capability that everyone has access to. So obviously the best way to learn with anything is to do it at home on your own equipment. Do the sort of the learning that's out there. There's lots of different ways that you can do learning and training, and experiment, right, at a smaller scale. And then once these facilities are rolled out more, I think then I think EAs need to have a very aggressive and specific, plan to use it, to leverage it.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. I mean, I think using it on your own is important. It's really the job of architects to stay up to date on the latest AI offerings. And so there's also a fair amount of research coming out from different vendors on how AI and EA are interacting, but also how AI is just impacting enterprises as a whole. So I think using it in your free time, staying up to date on the research, it's kind of almost in the job description of an architect. So that would be my thought. We have another question in the chat that's kind of interesting. If EA doesn't have access to all the data, but ChatGPT does, is the ChatGPT recommendation better?
Well, so this is an interesting one, and I would say it goes back to knowledge graphs, because ChatGPT does not have knowledge graphs. It's purely statistical, right? So I would say no. If you have the knowledge graph, you're going to get better answers from ChatGPT, but you got to provide it. You got to send it to them.
You have to send what to them?
You have to send a knowledge graph to ChatGPT in the context,
right?
So you've got to pull out the parts of the knowledge graph that are relevant to answering the questions, so that ChatGPT can actually, then synthesize the response based on that context.
Right. So we're assuming this ChatGPT is one that's been augmented by, enterprise data. And just to add on to that, I mean, there's still the element of, a human in the loop. Is someone going to fully trust an answer from a ChatGPT? TBD.
Exactly.
Let's see. Anything else in here? Death by repository. Very true, says Banal. Seems like there's some notes, but no other questions. Well, we can keep chatting for another minute or two, and we'll see if another question comes in. But thanks, Darragh, for joining us. I do think, I think AI is going to has already impacted a huge variety of roles, but I think there's a really unique opportunity to see its impact within architecture specifically. There's also this really unique opportunity for architects to grab onto AI as sort of a catalyst for establishing their place within their organization. If EA teams can be that source of knowledge about how the enterprise is using large language models, I think they'll be proving their value very, very easily. So if there was one takeaway I could leave with our viewers, it would be that.
Yeah, agreed. And I think EAs need to, they basically need to raise the game and use AI to do that.
Yeah, totally. Thanks everyone for hopping on. The recording of this episode will be available on our YouTube channel in probably 20 or 30 minutes. You can also go to ardoq.com. We have another Amplify webinar coming up on April 29th, where we'll be discussing AI in Ardoq's platform. So stay tuned for more information. Thanks everyone. And thank you, Darragh. And we'll talk again soon.
Thank you.